Hello, friends. Frogopolis here, and today I would like to talk about the existential nightmare that is being John Malkovich. Directed by Spike Jonze and written by a personal favorite of mine, Charlie Kaufman, Being John Malkovich follows a struggling puppeteer, Craig, and his wife, Lottie, who loves animals and works at a pet store. Craig takes his puppeteering very seriously and sees it as the highest form of art. He is your classic starving artist, but is pretty pompous about it. On the opposite end of things is Lottie, who loves what she does and absolutely adores animals, but has a very caring and selfless nature. Reality quite literally hits Craig in the face as he eventually starts looking for a job to help his wife and ends up finding one sorting for an office. This office is on the seventh and a half floor of the building and can only be accessed by using a crowbar to pry open the elevator when it stops midway. The strangeness of everything is treated naturally, and I really love the movie's blunt and off putting dialogue. I've always loved Charlie Kaufman's way of writing dialogue that sounds completely alien but natural to the universe it's set in, much like a Wes Anderson or Yorgos Lanthimos film. We meet his eccentric yet kind hearted boss, who unfortunately has a terrible speech impediment, and learn more about the history of the seventh and a half floor. Outside of his boss, Dr. Lester, Craig meets his co-worker Maxine, whom he quickly finds affection for despite being married. Maxine comes off as sarcastic and funny, but also kind of rude and self centered. Shortly after starting his job, Craig, by pure coincidence, when a file goes behind a filing cabinet, finds a portal which leads into John Malkovich's head, as you do. For this brief moment, Craig is able to see and experience what Malkovich sees and experiences before being sucked out and dumped out onto the side of a highway. Almost immediately, he tells Maxine about this experience, and Maxine's response is, of course, to monetize this incredible new discovery. When he tells his wife about the portal and brings her to the office to experience it herself, she has a very life changing experience after spending a few moments inside of Malkovich. When Lottie has a brief moment inside of Malkovich, she feels more like herself and really starts to think about her gender and sexuality in a very moving and thought provoking monologue. A theme of what it really means to be oneself and how it explores that in a fairly unique way is what really makes me like this movie. Though, of course, we have to remember that they're using a very real person to have these experiences, and the morality behind even being a passive observer inside of somebody else uh, has its questions. And we see that morality throughout the movie as, like mentioned earlier, Maxine is monetizing this experience and essentially selling out Malkovich's mind for monetary gain. Thankfully, most people this uses as a neat little experience that lets them get to know themselves more and come out of it in a positive way, like Lottie. But Craig has somewhat more nefarious ideas of what to do with this newfound discovery. In this time, Maxine forms a relationship with Malkovich so she can be closer to him, Lottie, and Craig. Lottie, in her trips to Malkovich, finds out that she is in love with Maxine, but Maxine only loves her back when she is John Malkovich. But of course, Craig is also in love with Maxine, so we end up getting this love triangle that is fought through John Malkovich and Craig being, well, Craig goes to certain lengths to try to get Maxine's affection. These links involve tying up Lottie and locking her in a cage so he can then pretend to be Lottie while inside Malkovich to be with Maxine. Lottie does eventually get herself free with the help of her pet chimpanzee and is able to call Maxine and tell her what's going on. Unfortunately, Maxine takes the news that Craig can somewhat control Malkovich now with more interest than what he had actually done to deceive her. Malkovich is understandably pretty freaked out that he's starting to lose control over his functions when people are literally in his mind, and he goes through Maxine to find out what's really going on and eventually finds Craig and the seventh and a half floor and the portal and wants answers. Now, finding out that there is this mysterious portal that goes inside your mind and allows people to see through you and with enough time influence your actions, well, that's quite a lot to take in. So Malkovich does what I think anyone would do and goes through the portal himself. Now, what happens when somebody goes into a portal into their own conscience? Well, what happens is Malkovich, 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 Malkovich. Now, John Malkovich is pretty freaked out when he lands on the side of the highway after Malkovich, Malkovich, and is pretty upset and yeah, rightfully wants everything shut down. But of course, this causes Greg to act quite desperately as being John Malkovich is the best thing going on for him. Craig is able to successfully completely take over Malkovich's body, and Maxine goes along with this due to his notoriety and wealth. And for about 8 months, Craig basically turns Malkovich into the world's greatest puppeteer and lives his dreams through him. I absolutely love Malkovich's acting when he's being controlled by Craig. It is some of the funniest stuff I've ever seen. Remember Craig's boss? Well, he plays a much bigger role in this than you'd imagine. Earlier in the film, Craig's boss, Dr. Lester, invites him and Lottie over to his house for a dinner, and while they're there, Lottie excuses herself to go to the washroom and ends up finding a room seemingly dedicated to the life of John Malkovich. In the 8 months that Craig has lived as John Malkovich, Lottie has decided to go back to Dr. Lester in order to get more answers for what's going on and ends up living there. And you find out that it's not only him who plans on using Malkovich to extend his life, but also a group of several other people. Also, in this 8 months, Maxine finds herself to be pregnant and very unhappy. She realizes she really does have feelings for Maxine and was happy being with her, even if it was in Malkovich, and she's willing to try to reach out to her at this point. But that doesn't matter since she is kidnapped, quote unquote, by the elderly group trying to use Malkovich as a vessel and Lottie. Of course, Craig finds out about this kidnapping and has the ultimatum of either leaving John Malkovich and simply being Craig, or I guess they'll hurt her or something. But of course, that was never going to happen. But Lottie does get into a heated argument with her and ends up chasing her inside of the subconscious of John Malkovich with a gun. This leads into a really cool sequence where we see them chase each other through different times in John Malkovich's life that he probably does not want to remember. And man, poor Malkovich has been through some shit. While this is happening, the group has Craig on the phone, and he realizes that without Malkovich, he is simply Craig, but he also does genuinely love Maxine, And he actually makes the right choice of leaving Malkovich to be with Maxine, but by then it's too late. When Maxine and Lottie eventually fall out of Malkovich and onto the side of the highway, Lottie apologizes for her very irrational actions and finds out that Maxine's baby is technically hers because she was in Malkovich when they made love. At this point, Maxine is able to really have a heart to heart with Lottie, and they decide to raise a child together and end up hailing a cab and driving off. Before that, though, Craig tries to get Maxine back, saying that he did all of this for her, but she wants nothing to do with him at this point. Poor John Malkovich only has a brief moment of freedom from Craig's control before the group takes over his body and become John Malkovich. 8 years later, Malkovich is, well, now I guess controlled by several elderly people and starts the process of finding a new body with Charlie Sheen, who's none the wiser, as he shows him the start of a series of portraits for Maxine's daughter. He and Maxine are happily together and raising a kid, while Craig is stuck inside the child with no way of being able to control or have any influence, thank God. The ending is rather ominous and bittersweet, as Malkovich never had a chance to really have his own life at the end. And we know in due time, Emily, who is Maxine's daughter, will essentially be another vessel for this group of people to prolong their life. But I don't think you're supposed to take everything that literally, as everything's more metaphorical and how we treat celebrities and parasocial relationships. The film's way of mixing both the positives of being able to explore yourself and really find happiness through this experience of even briefly being in somebody else's conscious, put along the side of the rather horrifying implications of not having control of yourself, makes this a really interesting experience. At the end, we're left with a wonderfully, darkly humorous and surreal comedy by Charlie Kaufman and Spike Jonze, and I highly recommend it. It's wildly imaginative, and everyone is great in it. Thank you for watching. Have a great day. Malkovich, Malkovich, Malkovich.